Hello beautiful people, I'm Vlad from Synaptic Schism. Today I am going to talk about masking, especially in the context of dense mixes. When I released the video about how I wrote Disturbed, there was a comment on Twitter, X, about how could I fit so much stuff and still be able to hear all of the instruments. I then asked if it would be cool to have a video about how I do this stuff, how I handle the masking and so on. The reply was positive, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. I think that this should be watched with a good set of headphones or with some nice speakers, because there will be things that are really just detail for the most part, so a good listening environment is advised. The chapters about this stuff are included, so you can navigate and check whatever you want. Cool? Alright, let's start. So, what is masking or frequency masking? It is when a certain frequency range is used by more than one instrument. The frequency range doesn't have to be the same between the several instruments. Let's assume it's just two of them. They just need to have a range that is common to the two of them. So for instance, the rhythm guitars go from low mids to low highs, while the lead guitars only has mids and highs. Now, the only part that matters to us are the mids and highs. That's where the masking is going to occur. And the masking occurs because one of the instruments has, in that frequency range, a volume that is louder or higher than the other instrument. That's when masking starts to occur, because our ears cannot get the two sources for the same frequency. It's only going to listen to one of them. Obviously, this is a lot more complicated because frequencies are in a continuous spectrum, so it gets a little bit more complicated than that, but you get the idea overall. Now, before I pick up the first fix, let's say, there's an important point, which is I'm going to start with the things that fix masking while I'm writing, and then I'll go to the mixing part. And the reason why I want to do this is because there's this misconception, in my opinion, a misconception that frequency masking is a problem that you solve while you're mixing. As far as I'm concerned, it's something that you should be considering while you are writing. So while you do the writing, the recording, the producing, anything before the mixing, you should be taking into consideration frequency masking at that stage, okay? So I'll start with stuff that is related to the writing, and then I will move to the mixing part. Cool? So let's start. So fix number one is to write with articulations in mind. So what are articulations? Articulations are basically different ways of playing instruments. The most extreme difference in articulations is if you have a continuous sustained tonal instrument. So let's say a violin, a organ, something like that, that gives you a sustained sound over time, and then you have a percussive instrument. The percussive instrument actually has a tone, but we don't even think about the tone. It's so extreme the way that it sounds when compared to a sustained sound that we completely ignore the fact that there's a tone there. We only really care about the percussive nature. And to show you how these things work in place, I'm going to play the band strings with a synth, this right here. So listen to these things. You could listen the synth below the strings, but it was still there. It wasn't masked by the strings. The strings are like an ostinato kind of sound. It's not a continuous sound. If it was something like legato strings or sustained strings with like big chords and that were taking the same frequency range, the synth would not be as present as it is here. Okay, in the mix is actually less present because the strings get tucked because of other instruments, but we'll get there in the meantime. So fix number one, use different articulations. However, it's important to note that this thing of using different articulations works at the higher frequencies, but not at the lower frequencies. You need to treat, while you're writing, the lowest ranges of frequency differently from the highest ranges of frequencies. So the higher ranges of frequencies, you can have an ostinato with two melodies playing, stuff like that. That cannot happen in the low end. And that's the reason, for instance, I'll keep the strings, but now I'm going to add the drums and the bass. So I'm going to play this and you will notice that they are completely separated, okay? There's no mess between the two of them. However, if I had double basses, note that I have violins left, violins right, violas and cello, but I don't have double basses in this strings section. The reason for that is that the strings are playing something completely different from the bass and, in this case, the drums. And if I had the double basses there, they would be playing something that would be in conflict in the low end. For that reason, I did not use double basses there. That was the whole point of not having double basses. They would be adding a lot of body to the strings, but they would be directly conflicting with, in this case, the bass and also the kick. So the third fix is timbre. Now, if you have ever layered instruments, you know what I'm talking about. Let's say that your kick has got 2 or 3 different instruments, or that your bass has got a synth bass plus an acoustic bass, or that your guitars are being complemented by a synth or something like that. That's layering. And layering is about adding character to a specific thing that it's playing, and that character is given because you are using different timbres. If the timbres were all the same in those instruments, they would be sounding exactly the same thing. Now, I don't have a good example in this track to show, but in orchestration, a thing that it's typical is, for instance, if you want the melody that's being played by the violins to punch through, you will add flutes to it. It's going to have that sound of the flute, that whistly sound of the flute is going to make that melody punch through the rest of the orchestra. Another good example is if you want something to kind of glue and mellow, you just add a clarinet, assuming they are in the same range, and the clarinet just makes everything glue together a lot better. So keep in mind that you can have instruments in the same frequency range and they are not masking that much, because the timbres are different. And because the timbres are different, you can use that to your advantage to create new sounds or give it a coloration, like it's often mentioned in orchestration, okay? So keep that in mind. I don't have a good example to show, but that's the whole point of using timbres to layer and not hide the instruments, okay? So now we get like to the threshold between writing and mixing. Volume. It should be pretty easy, but volume is something that while I'm writing, I'm like adjusting the gain of the instruments, and this allows me to control the volume over time to be sure that all of the instruments are being heard. And the good thing is that I have a rough mix already done when I go into the mixing stage. Now I'm going to show you an example using the guitar. So the rhythm guitars basically go from the low mids to the high mids, right? So low mids, mids, high mids. The rhythm guitars kind of dominate that whole space, especially because of distortion. Now, the lead guitars, in this case, in the case of this track, go from the mids to the high mids. We are concerned only about that space. What you can do with volume is basically hide or show different instruments depending on the volume that you are giving them. And I'll show you with the rhythm and the lead guitars, because it becomes pretty obvious. So if we look at the mixer, we have the lead guitars here. I'll use the lead guitars because they are at unity, which makes everything a lot easier. So I'm going to play this part and then I am going to lower the lead guitars. You will notice that the rhythm guitars, we can still listen to the rhythm guitars, but as I lower the lead guitars, they are going to disappear because most of the frequency range of the rhythm guitars is going to take over. However, we just need to tuck the lead guitars for them to be completely audible across the whole track. Okay, volume should be pretty obvious because volume is what makes instruments mask and unmask. But it's important to note that sometimes you can just add a dB. So for instance, if you're using something with timbre, and I've done this with acoustic guitars against violins, where the acoustic guitars are just giving like notes here and there, but then I wanted those acoustic guitars to kind of pop up a little bit more in a certain part of the track. So I just added a dB or two, and they are going to kind of sneak in and show themselves, and then you can, with automation, kind of revert back. And you can create this movement abusing the fact that frequencies mask each other and using timbres and articulations and so on to make things poke and disappear, and that will bring clarity to the track because you are showing and hiding different instruments over time. This is also true with expression. So for instance, if you use orchestral instruments, you can use expression, and that expression is going to bring out the instrument more, and then that instrument for a brief moment in time is going to show a little bit more than others, masking the others, and then it can go again into the background and be less audible, let's say. So all of these things can be used in a way to hide and show instruments as you want. Now, another one that should be pretty obvious is pan. And the reason why pan is obvious, it's because it's the only technique that we are talking here that actually puts sound in different physical places, right? So your two phone speakers or your two speakers in a stereo system, you are quite literally putting two things separated. I'm going to play the rhythm guitars, and you are going to listen to the two guitars in two different places, and you will notice that those are two guitars. So these things are relatively obvious, but you should be putting different things with pan in different places. I'm going to show you another example that I like quite a lot and that I showed in the How I Wrote video, which is the cymbals in the drums against the metals in the percussion. So check this. So by putting them in completely extreme places, so each one of them playing in different speakers, I gave a lot of width, and I created this rhythm going back and forth, and I completely separated the two instruments. Truth be told, one of them is a little bit more on the higher frequencies than the other, but still you do get that separation by just using pans, you know? Now, one of the problem with pans is that we think of these mixes as left, center, and right. At least I have almost nothing that it's not left, center, or right. I mean, toms and stuff like that, but it's across the spectrum. But the vast majority of instruments, to me, it's either on the left, on the right, or on the center. But we only have two physical mediums, left and right. So what is the center? The center is what is equal on both speakers. That's the center. It's an illusion. It doesn't exist. It's the thing that it's exactly the same on both speakers, which means that any frequency that is being played at the same level is going to appear at the center. This is a problem, for instance, for rhythm guitars. Let me show you while I show you this plugin. Okay, I'm going to put this plugin in the center. So you are listening to two guitars, one on the left, one on the right. Right? There aren't many doubts about that, right? However, there will be frequencies that will have the same volume at the center. So this plugin, what it does is it mixes the phantom center. The phantom center is the effect of thinking that there's something in the center because there's a frequency playing on both sides at the same level. So this mix knob, so this removes the phantom center, this only plays the phantom center. So I'm going to play the phantom center for you to understand that there's something there in the middle. So this is the phantom center. Now, obviously, that is going to be affecting the things that are in fact in the center. The kick, the bass, the snare drum, all of those things that are factually in the center are being affected by this. This is, and to make it worse, we assume that the guitars are left and right. This is masking and taking frequencies that it shouldn't. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play this and I'm going to remove the phantom center. And what you'll notice is that, for instance, in the case of the snare, you are going to get a lot more clarity and body from the snare. The snare without this plugin basically is a more high pitch hit than with this frequency. And you will notice that everything that is in the middle, that is being basically muddled by the rhythm guitar's phantom center, is just going to pop up without increasing in volume. Okay, let's check it out. Did you catch the difference? The kick is not as affected, but the click of the kick, a little bit high up, benefits a little bit. The snare benefits massively, and that's more of the mid-range of the bass kind of lives a little bit more with this. I'm going to play it again because I love this effect. So this is normal. And now with no phantom center. It's just beautiful. I love this so much. So this is a free plugin. I will leave the download link in the description, completely free. Now, the big part, the part that everyone usually is waiting for, it's the overall unmasking of big stuff. You know, it can be quite surgical, but usually it's quite big. I'm talking about unmasking plugins. Unmasking can be done in several ways. The classic example is the pumping in EDM. The pumping is because there's a sidechain to a compressor that is affecting the bass. So when the kick sends signal through that sidechain, the compressor tucks the bass down and it creates that pump effect. Okay, that's unmasking 101, but with a artistic twist to it. Okay. Now this can be done with compressors, as I explained, but also with EQ. So for instance, Pro Q3, you can side chain and then affect specific frequencies, something like that with the dynamic part. And then you have the more sophisticated software. The most well-known is TrackSpacer. I have seen people doing this with vocals with Soothe, which I found really interesting. So the idea with that was put Soothe in the tracks that would be lowered by the voice, and since Soothe has got all of those almost micro bands, it would affect only the things that needed. Very similar to that effect is the one that I use, which is a Pure Unmask. So I'm going to show you what Pure Unmask does. I have it. I will show it here on the orchestra. So this orchestra is basically a buzz for everything that is orchestra. In this case, it's only the band strings, okay? And the sidechain that is coming here is coming from the band. So the band are the guitars, the bass, and the drums. So this buzz band is sending a signal to the sidechain of Pure Unmask on orchestra. I'm going to remove it and add it to show you the effect. So I'm going to explain the effect. Basically what Pure Unmask is doing is, instead of just lowering everything as a compressor would do, it's lowering the spectral image of those frequencies that we want to affect. What that does in practice is, the apparent effect is that everything is lowered, but not really. Only the frequencies that are stronger on the band side, which leaves a lot of space for the strings to continue to shine. While without Pure Unmask, what appears to happen is that the strings are too loud. With Pure Unmask, the strings are less loud, they are quieter, but they are quieter because there are specific frequencies that are being toned down, while all the others can flourish and show themselves. It's a pretty cool effect. That's also the reason why when I showed with the synth, the strings sounded a little bit too loud, because since the rest was muted, the band was not affecting this. Again, the classical use of all of this is to send the sidechain from the kick to the bass, and all and behold, here it is. Now, here the effect is a little bit more subtle, I would say. I'm going to show just the bass and the kick. It's more subtle. You will notice that when the kick hits, you can hear all of the kick, while when I bypass Pure Unmask, what happens is that the kick sounds muffled in a way, and that's just the frequencies of the bass that are getting in the way. You can see I'm not doing a lot with it. It's a very subtle effect, but it's very effective because the kick just punches in enough to be very present. So let me show you just the two of them. Now without. Okay, now I'm going to show with all of the tracks playing. And that's it. I showed you all of my tricks. So keep in mind that you should be thinking about these conflicts while you're writing. That's very important. And then just using these ideas while mixing. So volume, pan, phantom center, and then mask. You can do some pretty dense tracks while you listen to all of the instruments at the same time. And they work really well. So I hope you enjoyed it. And until next video. Bye-bye.